Mixing with Mike plugin of the week is the Universal Audio 175B and 176 tube compressor collection. These are two amazing additions to the Universal Audio collection. I have a lot of experience working with the 175, and it's an amazing compressor, really an amazing sounding one. This is a predecessor to the 1176, designed by Bill Putnam Sr. in around 1960. Later on, towards the end of that decade, around 69, is when the first 1176 came into being with the FET circuit. This is a tube compressor, so it's giving you some of the characteristics that you might get from a Fairchild compressor with the flexibility that you would get from an 1176. So the beginnings of it are right here. You can see it with the attack settings that go from 1 to 7 here, and the release settings that go to 1 to 7, where the 7 is the fast setting and the 1 is the slow release setting. So there's some premonition here to what is to come from the 1176 later on. It's a much warmer, richer sound than the 1176, and you'll kind of hear that as I do the audio examples. So essentially what we have here, we'll go through the two of them, display just some of the differences, and then go straight to audio examples. More or less what you have is a fixed threshold compressor, so you drive the input level up to push it through the threshold to get gain reduction. You have display of input gain reduction or output over here. The input will show prior to this input gain control, just a little FYI in that, and the output will show post everything. You have an attack and release settings. Now, the attack and release settings are not quite as fast as what you get in 1176, but they are still pretty fast. So at its fastest setting, which is the number 7 setting over here, you're getting 100 microseconds. So that's still 0.1 milliseconds. And I believe that the 1176 is something like 20 microseconds or 30 microseconds, pretty fast. And then on the release time, you get about and that ranges up to 1 second on the attack time. And which is actually, I'm sorry, 1 millisecond on the attack time. I'll take that back because it's 1,000 microseconds the way that they display it here. And then the release gives you on the fast side, I think I may have done that backwards. So the fast is here and the slow is here. The fast is 27 milliseconds on the release and 527 for the longest timing on the release. So you have a range, a pretty broad range there as well. It's all kind of program dependent. I'm not sure how you ended up with 27 milliseconds. Maybe that was on average, but that's the basic idea. And then you have an output gain here for calibrating balancing the output for unity gain. The vernier control is one. Now on the original unit there was one, but it was basically giving you just like that little bit of extra gain because there were stepped gain switches that you'll see here that go in 2 dB increments. So you'll see that right here. If you switch to the vernier control, the way that it works on this is actually it makes this a completely variable control instead of having it click into those stepped increments. So that's basically the only difference there. Now, in terms of working with it, there's a headroom control, which calibrates around like minus 16. So that's in the straight up position, and it allows you 3 steps in either direction. And what that basically allows you to do is to either drive more input signal with lower output signal so that you drive more compression, or the other way around if you want more dynamic range kind of coming into the unit. And this unit has been emulated head to tail, like the whole thing, the whole circuit, beginning to end, including the bias circuit. So this balance control controls the balance between the plate and the cathode bias trims, which are actually 2 separate trims. And so you can change the way that the actual compression reacts based on this control here. So you could play around that a little bit as well. What they've added in here is something that's not part of the original, which is a mix control, so you can do parallel compression right within the same unit. The Sidechain Link is available when you have stereo instantiation, so that will tie the left and right together. So as you work with it on a stereo track, if you tie the Sidechain links together, they will both compress together. Otherwise, they will compress independently of each other with the same settings. All right, so that's the basics there. You have an on-off switch. So the difference for the 176 from the 175B is that you have the ratio controls here instead of the high-low switch that you see over here. So what you have is 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1. Should look very familiar if you're used to the 1176. And what's interesting is that the lower ratios have a softer knee and a lower threshold. So essentially, you're going to get gain reduction. You will see more gain reduction most often with the 2 to 1 than you will to the 12 to 1, which will give you kind of a harder knee kind of compression. So as you step through it, you may get something a little bit closer to even gain reduction than what you would expect, or leaning a little bit more heavily to gain reduction when you go to the lower ratio, which sort of doesn't make sense. But that's actually true to the original. And it will give you a softer compression attack and a harder compression attack as you go up higher in ratio. So that's a big part of the sound and character of all this. So let's feed a vocal into this just straight up. Let me cue into the verse here for a second. And I'm not sure how I ended up closing that, but I'll bring it back open. And so I'll bypass that, and let's have a listen here to a vocal track. I'll solo it up, and here we go.
The world is not my home. I'm passing through something greater than this life that I must be living for. And earthly treasures had me bound, and they always tear me down. And in the shelter of your arms, you'll always find me there.
Right, so you can really hear like the warmth and body that this brings into it. I could also drive it more, get a little heavier kind of gain reduction
The
with
world
it.
is not my home. I'm passing through something greater than this life that I must be living for. And earthly treasures had me bound, and they always tear me down. And in the shelter of your arms, you'll always find me there.
So you can really hear how it can really glue together the sound, where on this vocal it's a bit thin and maybe a little bit transparent, and this can kind of bring some body into it. And then I can use the mix control to kind of balance that out.
The world is not my home. I'm passing through something greater than this life that I must be living for.
Right, where I can preserve and keep some of the natural dynamic while bringing in some body. Really incredibly powerful tool for working with vocals. So let's go to the 176 and kind of take a look at how I might use this a little bit differently. So here we have the ratios. So if we operate this at 12 to 1, essentially we're going to get very similar kind of vibe to what we're getting here. So let me do some different settings here. And there's also one other feature which I didn't really get into here, which is there's an off switch. You can only get to the off switch by clicking on the off. So if you actually pull this down, it won't go into the off setting. You'll notice that when I click on that, it pushed down like one other level there to expose the off. So what that does is it bypasses the compression circuit and allows you just to monitor the signal through the electronics. So you get just as a tonal coloration without any compression. You can actually work it that way as well, which is kind of cool. All right, so let's check this out. So this will be very similar, but I'm going to get a basic sound here and then go through some of the ratios just so you can hear the difference.
The world is not my home. I'm passing through something greater than this life that I must be living for. And earthly treasures had me bound, and they always tear me down. And in the shelter of your arms, you'll always find me there.
Right, so same type of thing, right? Maybe a slightly different sound. Not entirely clear. That could have to do with the settings not being exactly the same here. So let's switch to 2 to 1 now and notice the difference.
The world is not my home. I'm passing through something greater than this life that I must be living for. And earthly treasures had me bound, and they always tear me down.
So you could hear, if you notice, when you go to the lower one, you get like a softer kind of a compression, right? So it sort of smooths out the compression, where it seems to be more, when you switch to 12 to 1, it seems to be more responsive. It's grabbing onto the signal a bit more. So you can hear that more aggressiveness in terms of the compression. So I'll just switch back and forth between some of the settings here just so you can get a flavor for that.
The world is not my home. I'm passing through something greater than this life that I must be living for. And earthly treasures had me bound, and they always tear me down. And in the shelter of your arms, you'll always find me there.
So of these, for this particular vocal, I like the 12 to 1 best. And I just, love the body that it kind of brings into the vocal, which in this case it's missing a bit just on its own, and this the current simplified mix state that it's in. So that's a very cool one, and this could be used for a lot of different purposes. So I'll just kind of show you a couple of other things here, a couple of other ways to do it. So this is, let me kind of clear this out. So this is on the bass. So let's just check this out. Now there's some ways that you can kind of use this to sort of generate a bit of distortion. One is to use like a very fast attack and fast release. And here, let me go up to the... So what happens is with that super fast attack and release, you get a lot of this action within, which is like it's just shaking, basically, or vibrating and creating that kind of distortion, and you kind of mix it in with parallels. So here, I'll just crank it all the way up just so you can hear it. Right, so when you drive that in, now you can mix a little bit of that in just to kind of ripple a bit of harmonic distortion. It's a little bit excessive, but... And otherwise, you can see I'm getting that extra gain in here by switching to the high input versus the low input, which would give me a lot less gain reduction, right? And if I slow down the attack here, I can kind of play around with this to smooth it out if I want a more, even kind of sound. But you can hear like the harmonic richness and then just the openness that it adds, around the sound. And it's really an amazing emulation. I've been blown away by it since I've been playing around with it. Just downloaded it yesterday, and I got caught up in a session with it, start putting it on different things, and it's like, wow, this really sounds amazing on just like almost everything that you put it on. It's one of the things I'll demonstrate here just to kind of show like a guitar solo, and this is a part that also kind of has a bit of brittleness to the sound, and I'll just kind of show you how using this we can also kind of bring in some body and warmth. So here's the 176. I have it on 12 to 1. This might be a good one to kind of go to like a 2 to 1, just to act as a smoothing factor here for the sound. You can just really hear how it just pulls the sound together. It brings like a warmth and richness that helps it to image more clearly. Here, let me just kind of back this bass down here a little bit and brace yourself. Here we go. Let's see what that sounds like with like a 12 to 1 ratio. It's kind of what I expected here, where you really hear how that smoothness there really helps the guitar sound kind of come in together. Okay, here we go. This is like heaven for people who work in DAWs all the time. It does something that is very hard to do, or you get these kind of sounds that are kind of thin, a bit pinched, wiry sounding, and the digital only helps to seem to exaggerate that characteristic, although it's just kind of capturing what's originally there. And this does everything that you kind of want an analog compressor or analog plugin to do, which is, just kind of cut that down, make it image well, add some solidity and depth to it. These two additions here are just amazing. I just continually, every time I put it on something, it's like, wow, it works on that too. Wow, it works on that too. Really amazing. A great addition to the Universal Audio collection. And although it kind of got released on its own, actually, there were some other updates. If you have the microphone, there's a bunch of microphones that were added in to their collection as well. But aside from that, this is really an outstanding one. Plugin of the week, Universal Audio UA 175B and 176 tube compressor collection. Really top notch. This is a must have for sure. Plugin of the week. Mixing with Mike.